Unlike advances in chips, memory and storage rarely grab the headlines, even though they are arguably as important. Jeff Hsieh is the CEO of ATP Electronics, a manufacturer of specialized storage and memory solutions. Our presenter Susan Chow asked him about the role the memory sector plays in the semiconductor industry at a time of an AI boom.
So in any system, the memory and storage is vital and needs to work in harmony with the compute element. In the recent AI boom, the revolution, the last few years, there's been a huge, massive uptake in computing, acceleration, and thus the data with it. This is starting in the data center first, and that's where the top tier DRAM and NAND makers are focused. So these are suppliers like Micron, Samsung, Hynix, Kioxia. While they focus on the data center, outside the data center, there's actually a significant amount of bit growth as well. This is coming from networking, coming out of the data center, all the way to the edge. And at the edge, we're seeing a tremendous wave of new applications at the edge. So that's where ATP comes into play. Essentially, we work with our partner suppliers, the same guys I mentioned, Micron, Samsung, Kioxia, Hynix, and we utilize the core memory components from them, but we build customized solutions for any type of application on the edge. At the edge, we're seeing applications with different workloads, abnormal situations, new environments. So essentially, we cater to those specialty areas, and we work in partnership to utilize other components to build any type of requirement that's needed. Now, this technology challenge is only part of the equation. The supply chain is a huge variable. And in some ways, it's more challenging than even the technology itself.
So you just mentioned the dynamics of market supply and demand, or just the overall flow efficiency of the supply can even contribute further to the volatility of memory. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. I think first, memory is very famous for being dynamic and moving very quickly. Historically, this is in supply, demand, pricing cycles, up and down, up and down. One thing that's made it more challenging, more complicated the last few years is with this AI revolution in the accelerated computing area. There's a new class of memory that basically needs to work with the GPU structures from NVIDIA. This is called HBM, high bandwidth memory. When memory suppliers need to plan their capacity for the demand next year, it's like looking at a crystal ball. They have to try to look at where the demand will be and they plan. So one analogy I like to use is airlines have to plan the capacity for their routes for next year. So they have to crystal ball and imagine how many passengers will join. In the memory industry, HBM is, in a way, the analogy, they're the first class tickets. So recently with the HBM AI boom, the first class tickets, the seats have all been sold out. And there's more and more demand needed there. So if you look at the rest of traditional compute, enterprise server, consumer, client, mobile, you can look at these as, in the same analogy, like business class, premium economy, and so on. So if the demand is not so clear from the other areas and their first class is completely sold out, if you are the airline, you would bank everything on, you would prioritize first class. So what we do is more in the enterprise, networking, industrial niche space. So you can look at that as kind of like the business class. Unfortunately, we have a lot of uncertainties. We have geopolitical uncertainties that's coming up. This is causing a lot of rifts in the demand. So for us, the challenge is how do we forecast the supply? How do we ensure supply? Because in most areas, we're still growing, but we need to ensure that we align the supply in the right place. So this is, in a way, fighting for business class seats when first class is completely sold out and doing really well.
So as you mentioned, when we look at the major forces shaping this year's economic outlook, geopolitical uncertainty seem to be a big recurring theme for everyone. So with growing pressures on supply chain, as you just mentioned, what might be some mitigation strategies to reduce these sudden impacts?
Yeah, this is a challenging situation because even in the last several years, a lot of our supply chain has already adapted to the geopolitical environment. Most of this has been in the form of a lot of final assembly moving out of China into other areas of Asia, particularly South Asia. So this was the so-called China Plus One initiative. Unfortunately, we saw this year, there's really no country outside of the US that's immune to the threat of tariffs. With the complexity of our supply chain, with how fast geopolitical changes happen, there's really nothing we can do to prepare except to be as agile as possible. So I can probably just share from ATP's side what we're doing. Agility-wise, we've really looked at two areas where we can make ourselves faster to adapt. The first is in our own supply chain. So we have to look at upstream, what components are we using? Where are these components coming from? Where are their countries of origin? We have to not only prepare multiple suppliers, but we have to make sure that our source of supply comes from potentially multiple countries. We may be in a situation where we may have customers needing a China-based supply chain or a non-China-based supply chain. In that scenario, then unfortunately, it means more resources for us. Each product may need multiple configurations. Multiple times we have to retest the same product. Another area is obviously our own production footprint. So how fast can we move our production if we need to go to a different country, including the US? All of our products are very complex. So our production test, quality check, all of these test flows are hundreds and hundreds of steps. So what we've done is we've cataloged this whole process. We've looked at those steps that are the most complicated. Typically, these steps are also the most confidential, the most sensitive. And we're looking at how we can minimize this risk if we want to move those steps. There are new opportunities with the AI revolution that help enable this. So there's a lot of talk about agentic AI, particularly in manufacturing. There's digital twin, but now there's domain twins. These domain twins basically can help you act as agents to run your skilled labor when it comes to production and test. So we're exploring all these opportunities. We're looking at where and how we can make our production remote operated. So the dream would be we can move our equipment anywhere. We can have our force of agentic AI agents or domain twins basically ramping the production and running the production, but in the same quality system, same manufacturing control system that potentially could still be in Taiwan.
So Taiwan is often viewed by the world as the center of tech innovation. And, with shows like Computex, we set the tone for future trends on tech and AI development. So based on your view as a major player in the semiconductor ecosystem, what do you think about this year's Computex theme, AI Next, and how do you think it could be defined?
So I think first of all, I really like the AI Next theme because it's so universal. Because the word next can be applied to many different aspects or mindsets. So I think sharing from our point of view, being in the B2B, in the supply chain for memory, from our aspect, we saw AI Next as basically the next chapter in the AI story. If this is the second chapter, the first chapter are basically the AI enablers, the AI, let's say early adapters, investors, that have chased the iterations of LLM and proven the power of what AI can do. When I look at AI Next as the next chapter, to me, the next chapter is the enterprise, all the companies involved in the enterprise, to start adapting their own story, their own strategy for AI. How we want to utilize our data as assets, what do we want to turn these assets into in terms of productivity? So for me, that's kind of the second chapter, so it's the next chapter of AI.
And based on what you see, can you elaborate a little bit more on how companies are developing strategies to be able to go to the phase 2 that you mentioned?
So I guess I can just share from ATP what we're doing for this chapter. So like many companies, the last couple of years, we've been cataloging where our data is. Based on where our data is, we start looking at data as assets, and we want to figure out our strategy. What can we turn this asset into? What can this data do for us or our customer? Based on this strategy, we're now in the mindset of how do we deploy this? There's many different ways. You could as easily just use ChatGPT type prompts. but it's not that easy when you're in the enterprise. You have your data is confidential. There's lots of also specific applications that are not generalized. So we need to start figuring out our deployment plan. And unfortunately, every application might need a different strategy. One example I can give you is we have decades of validation and failure analysis data on our products. This data can potentially help predict the next generation products in terms of your configuration, your BOM. It can help you develop your validation test reports, predictions. But that's a very, number one, near and dear data set to ATP. Number two, the specific output we would want from that is also very, very specific in terms of what we want. So in that scenario, that might make sense as a deployment strategy to do it on-prem using an open source LLM model that we bring in. We can adjust the AI temperature, we can adjust the output, so we can fine tune exactly what type of quality, what type of accuracy we need. But there's lots of other areas of data as an enterprise we have. For example, our ERP is using SAP, HANA 4S. So SAP is already developing their own suite of next generation business AI tools. Now, for a lot of the business questions and business enablements we would want from AI, they're very likely similar to other businesses. So in this situation, we may leverage the SAP development, their suite development, because most likely they have already best practices, they already understand what questions, what needs their customers need. So that's another example where we would leverage a partner or we would use an enterprise partner platform to enable this.
Yeah, so when you talk about data, of course, we're going to think about data security, data confidentiality, as well as data ethics, yes. Right? So, how can companies balance innovation and ethical considerations as we move to the next phase of AI development or its applications?
Sure, I think as our data becomes stronger as an asset internally as a company, the chapter after that would potentially be we're doing B2B business. So we work with supplier partners, we work with customers. The next chapter could potentially be how do we collaborate with this data? Imagine if you combine that data set with your partners. The challenge there is what you mentioned. Today, doing B2B business, we already have a very complicated framework of non-disclosure agreements, IP confidentiality, liabilities, indemnities. So we need to rethink that, but from a standpoint of our data is now merged, fused, and we are having AI content outputs with our joint data. So with that same question, it becomes a lot more complicated. Who owns that content? Who's liable for it if you run into infringement issues? So I think there's not a simple answer to this, but it's something we have to face as the enterprise, because I think the outcome, the value is too powerful. Because I mentioned the challenge of supply chain, the challenge of building next generation products. If we combine the strength of our data assets with our partners, imagine how visible, how fast we could react in the supply chain, all the way from the bottom demand, all the way up to our suppliers. And so on, if not only we had our own validation data, but our customer system level validation data, we could build that much stronger products. So this is, I believe, the next paradigm we have to face as an enterprise.